We always talk about machine learning and fraud detection models, but what about challenges we have working with the financial data? And after that, methods we can use to monitor the model properly. My name is Roxana and this is your Feedzai fraud and financial crime update. There are several challenges when coming to financial fraud labels. First, it's very rare that we get some fraud labels. And in most cases, we have less than 5% fraud, which makes it very difficult for the model to learn from this small portion of the data. The model is learning much more from the legitimate transactions compared to the fraud. The second problem is fraudsters are constantly evolving, which means that it's challenging to detect and label new data types of fraud patterns. For example, suppose that after COVID, most of the people shop online. As soon as the people start changing their behavior, fraudsters also do the same. So maybe they start to work on the card not present transactions. The last issue is labeling errors. Fraud labels can be very inaccurate and uncertain because there's always humans involved in the process of labeling before a model goes into production. Overfitting happens when the training set is performing much better compared to the validation set or test set. Maybe the model is very good in the spring season, but then if we evaluate the model on the summer season, it might not perform as good. During the model training and after we are monitoring the model, we may notice some changes in the data or some degradation. One cause for that can be data drift. There are many techniques and many measures to figure out this data drift. One of these measures is PSI or Population Stability Index. This measure looks at the distribution of the training data versus the production data or sample data. And if it sees a huge difference between these two distributions, then there is actually a data drift. The problem here is that the model is not able to catch the patterns that it's already learned. So what we do in this case is retrain the model, train the same model over most recent data. The other thing we can do is to check for the feature importance and only keep the features that are very important, or the other thing is that we can redesign the features to be more resilient. What are the data challenges you have in your industry? Let us know in the comments below. Next time we are going to talk about performance metrics and how we can monitor model performance. Thanks for watching. This was your Feedzai fraud and financial crime update.